in the Office of Markets and Innovation at the Department of Public Service. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to the discussion today on the LMI EEBE Performance Management Framework and the development of that framework. I'm joined today by a number of colleagues from the Department of Public Service working on the LMI EEBE programs, including Tanya Dougal, Colin Atkins, Arturo Lua Castillo, and and Bianca Scrico. And we're gonna get started in just a minute. It looks like we have most people logged in. Yeah, why don't we get started? Let's go to the next slide, please. And the next slide. So what we're going to do here is I'll start off with a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the conversation. So we've booked 2 hours for this discussion. We want to provide some background in terms of the way that the EEBE order directs DPS staff to think about the performance management of these programs. We want to provide you a little bit of history on the way we've approached performance management to date, and then really open it up for discussion. So we want to make sure that we have at least an hour or so set aside for discussion with the group. If we end early, then great, but just know that we do have the time set aside today for for you to provide any input that you have on this topic for us. As you've joined, you're muted upon entry. We'll be able to unmute you. You're also able to unmute yourself when it comes time to do so. We'll let you know. The chat is enabled, but we're not going to be monitoring the chat for questions. Instead, we'd like you to please use the Q&A feature or raise your hand, your virtual hand, I should say, if you have any questions to ask. And then I'll also say here the materials that we'll be reviewing today, including the slides, a recording of this webinar, and then any notes that we take will be captured and then posted in the document and matter management system under case 25M0249. And if you have questions on how to access that, just let us know and we'll help you out there. Next slide, please. So, one of the things that we wanted to do today is, really have a discussion. We want, to the extent possible, for this meeting to be interactive. We need to hear about you from, on your perspectives regarding the LMI programs and how we think about managing and overseeing the performance of those programs. And so for this webinar, we're using Slido. I don't know to what extent everyone here has used Slido before. I know some of you have. But we're kind of looking at this as a tool to help facilitate our discussion. So please, if you have a minute now, log in to Slido. So you could use the QR code on your phone, or you can go to slido.com and enter in the participant code of 3941467. And so that'll make sure that you're able to participate in some of the prompts that we have for you to facilitate input. If you do have challenges with Slido, you could obviously just respond to any questions that we have in the webinar Q&A function. So just raise your hand and or drop your question or your response in the Q&A function. Next slide, please. Okay. So now that we got some of the logistics and housekeeping out of the way, why don't we start with a test of our ability to use the Slido platform. So we have a number of folks registered for this webinar. We have 60 plus registered. I'm sure more will be attending. So if you wouldn't mind, please just take a second and enter into the Slido environment. What sort of organization do you represent? it'd be helpful for us to get a sense for, who's in the conversation, and obviously it'll allow us to follow up as needed based on kind of your affiliation here. Okay, so we have a nice mix of attendees, and it's really hard to follow Slido, um, kind of changing uh, by submission, but looks like we have about a third of participants representing community-based organizations, which is great. State and local government, about a third of participants. And then we have a mix of program administrators, contractors, consumer advocacy organizations, or other. Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all for attending. Let's go to the next slide, please. So with respect to today's agenda, as I mentioned earlier, we definitely want to get your input. We want to talk about, how DPS staff should be thinking about developing the performance management process for the LMI EEBE portfolio. We'll talk a little bit about the goals for today in a minute. We want to provide everyone with a brief overview on the LMI Energy Efficiency and Building Electrification portfolio. So obviously this stems from the Commission's May 15th order. We want to dedicate some time just kind of reviewing where we are in terms of performance management for the LMI EEBE programs. As I mentioned, we want to dedicate at least an hour to a discussion on performance management in regard to these programs. And then we'll wrap up with some next steps that'll be coming out of today. Next slide, please. Okay. So with respect to the goals that we have, so we have three primary objectives, right? So we want to discuss the development of the performance management framework and process. We want to obtain feedback from all of you in terms of your priorities and your thoughts on performance management process for these programs. We want to talk about next steps. But beyond that, if you have additional goals that you want to accomplish or things that we need to cover that we don't have listed here, just drop them in the Q&A if you don't mind, and we'll keep an eye out for that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're using Slido again here. And again, to help us kind of get a sense for, where you all might be coming from with respect to this, this topic, we'd like for you to please, with one word, to the extent that you can use one word, if you have to use two, that's okay, describe your interest in the LMI EEBE performance management process. Like, what is the outcome that you're hoping to see here, through the work that we do to measure and monitor how these programs are working? And I'll just take a couple minutes here and give you a chance to enter in any thoughts that you have. Okay, so I see folks are still typing away, but maybe let's take a couple of minutes if you don't mind, and I'd be interested to hear anyone's thoughts that submitted a comment. So for those of you who kind of typed in the term clarity, would somebody mind coming off mute or raising your hand and maybe explaining your thoughts there a little bit more? What sort of clarity are we kind of seeking? Kareem, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I saw others write clarity, but I was thinking about that myself. I was thinking about impact both on the state and on the LMI populations. of what are we gauging, what are we measuring the right things, but also as somebody who works with the regional clean energy hubs, trying to get clarity on what we might be measured on as well.
Great. Thanks, Kareem. And I will say, as we'll kind of get into in this conversation, today is really focused on, you know, uh, the broader picture when it comes to, what are the outcomes, that we need to be thinking about, how are stakeholders accessing information about how these programs are doing, and we want to talk about engagement as well. We won't get into how specific programs will be measured, but in talking through kind of what our priorities are for kind of the overall portfolio and the general kind of priorities that we have for um, you know for measuring progress. One might be able to kind of link that to individual programs, but we won't get into kind of specifics on individual programs today. But thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to? I got time for one or two other folks that might want to explain their thinking here. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. I see a hand. Jenna, do you want to come off mute um, and give it a go? Jenna, can you hear us? Okay, I think we're having a technical difficulty with audio, Jenna. So we'll come back. We'll come back to you once you get that straightened out. Any other hands? Anybody want to volunteer? Okay. So just kind of looking at the range of responses here, right? So everything from accountability to funding, accessibility, equity, transparency, uh, less outside consultants, opportunity, success. So um, there's a common thread here with I think what Kareem voiced earlier, like what is the impact on programs? How are we thinking of measuring them? Obviously, but then we have some comments that are a bit broader than that, um, and maybe a little more nuanced as well. Jenna, are you ready to go? Okay, we're still having that audio issue, Jenna. So we're gonna move on, and then we could come back to you later on in the conversation. Sorry about that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, let's spend just a few minutes with a refresher on the LMI EEBE order. Can we go to the next slide? So, as many of you know, at this point, the Public Service Commission back in May of this year, May 15th, issued an order that authorized the LMI EEBE portfolio for 2026 through 2030. This was a companion order to the non-LMI EEBE portfolio, or the portfolio of programs that would focus on market rate customers across multiple sectors: residential, commercial, industrial. Um, and the LMI order in particular did a few things, right? So number one, it authorized just over $1.5 billion of programming through from 2026 through 2030 for the LMI market segment. It adopted a shift in program administrative roles over that period of time. So, currently, as we all know, NYSERDA and all of the utilities have responsibilities for directly administering LMI EEBE programs through one form or another. Going forward, the utilities in NYSERDA will have a bit of a shifted kind of set of roles and responsibilities, with the primary program administrative roles really falling on NYSERDA, who would be operating a statewide 1 to 4 family homes program and upstate affordable multifamily program, as well as providing market supporting activities through workforce development, awareness and education, engagement activities, right? Whereas Con Edison and National Grid, the downstate companies, KEDLI and KEDNY, will be administering an affordable multifamily program in the New York metro area. NYSERDA will be collaborating and working with the downstate utilities on the affordable multifamily program offerings there, with the respect that NYSERDA will be offering technical assistance and supports for affordable multifamily projects, whereas Con Edison and National Grid will be administering the rebate programs. The LMI EEBE order also required staff to improve oversight of the portfolio, to facilitate a transition of the current joint management committee model, and to develop a performance management process, which we will be speaking about obviously throughout this time block that we have together. The one thing I'll mention here when it comes to the development of the performance management process for the LMI EEBE programs. So this requirement is not kind of indicating that at the Department of Public Service, we don't have a performance management process in place for these programs. The real intent here is to look at ways to improve the outcomes of the LMI programs, just given over the last, several years, we've kind of noticed, and it's been reported, in our staff review of New Efficiency New York and the Clean Energy Fund, and in subsequent orders from the Commission, that there are opportunities for us to do better when it comes to serving low and moderate income households and affordable multifamily buildings. And so, the focus here on performance management is really kind of an enhancement of what we're doing in order to make sure that the Commission's objectives for the LMI EEBE portfolio are met for the 2026 or 2030 time period. And we'll speak a bit about those objectives in a moment. Next slide, please. So, at a high level here, the Commission within the EEBE order identified some key objectives that the ratepayer funding that is deployed through these programs should seek to achieve, right? So looking at reducing energy consumption and energy burden for households that are experiencing the greatest energy burden. That's a big priority for the Commission and for the Department of Public Service. A need to maximize the impact of ratepayer funds. So that could happen several ways, right? Effective coordination at the state and local level, the leveraging of other funding sources where possible and where available, and through administrative efficiencies. There's a need to simplify participation and administrative burden for applicants of programs, as well as contractors that are working in the programs. There's a need to improve the way that program administrators and the department seek and obtain feedback from market participants in how programs are designed and implemented. There's a need for increased transparency in program and portfolio performance. And there's a need to ensure clarity and certainty on, program design details. So, program guidelines, goals, budgets. So these need to be kind of, clear and certain for market participants. And the real emphasis there is, we want to minimize volatility, in program budgets and other program changes, because we know that has a rippling effect, right, for service providers, contractors, for customers at the end of it all. Next slide, please. Okay. So the EEBE order, as I mentioned, and I think as many of you probably have read already, established a few different requirements when it comes to performance management for the LMI EEBE programs and the portfolio overall. Right. So number one, the the portfolio should provide the ability for, or the performance management framework for the portfolio should provide the ability for DPS staff, for program administrators, and for stakeholders to have visibility into key program metrics and outcomes. It needs to include plans for enhanced stakeholder engagement. It needs to assess any potential modifications of reporting requirements for program administrators, including the type and level of program performance metrics that should be reported. And then it should identify key performance indicators for the LMI programs to measure progress towards the PSC objectives. So this was the charge within the EEBE order, and one that through this conversation and some subsequent meetings that we'll be scheduling, we'll want to get more insight and perspective from you all on how we should be thinking about addressing these requirements that the department has. Okay, next slide, please. So now we want to shift the conversation a little bit from kind of background to performance management and how DPS staff are thinking about it. Before we go any further, are there any clarifying questions or other points that those of you in the meeting have related to the previous content we just discussed? So Kareem, I see your question. Are the objectives listed in order of importance or another order? So within the order, the commission did not explicitly kind of rank the objectives. The way that the department is approaching these is they're all kind of equally important to achieve. And so another question: what does plans to enhance stakeholder engagement mean? So this is really kind of pointing to, how the department will, improve and kind of seek kind of additional opportunities for engaging with stakeholders on the actual, LMI portfolio, the performance of the portfolio, as well as the individual programs. Okay. If you have any other questions, folks, just drop them in the Q&A and we'll come back to them as we have time. So let's go to the next slide, please. So as just discussed, the charge to DPS staff is to develop a process by which we could help to ensure that the commission's objectives for the LMI portfolio and programs are achieved. When we think about performance management, we're essentially talking about a process of continuous improvement that includes a way to measure progress towards objectives and goals, transparency and visibility into what's happening within programs in the overall portfolio, and a discussion and a way to kind of receive input from stakeholders and other external parties to explore opportunities to improve our ability to achieve the goals that the commission has. As we're thinking about this performance management process, we need to kind of think about a couple of key considerations. Top of mind for department staff at this point are obviously balancing the burden of reporting and measurement, right? Sometimes as we're talking about availability of data, that's really dependent on systems that are available and are being used to administer programs, right? And so one of the things that we're going to keep in mind here as we develop, the process by which we'll monitor how these programs in the portfolio are doing is, to what extent data is available, whether there are kind of additional or incremental costs that would have to be borne by ratepayers when it comes to collecting the data and reporting it. That's going to be really important for us. And so obviously, sitting here today without having an opportunity yet to do a deep dive into this, we need to do some investigation. And based on input from this conversation and future conversations, we'll be able to think about what data do we actually have access to today, where are the gaps, and help us figure out how to achieve our objectives here in terms of developing this performance management process with available data. The other thing I want to flag here is I mentioned earlier we have a non-LMI portfolio of programs. These programs are also administered by the same program administrators, whether it's the utilities or NYSERDA. They're also running LMI programs, right? So we want to kind of, to the greatest extent possible, ensure some consistency in terms of the reporting requirements and the kind of administrative burden that is put on the program administrator. So back again to my point about cost, right? At the end of the day, somebody pays for this, right? And it's typically ratepayers who wind up paying for additional administrative burden. So we want to be really cognizant of that before or when making decisions on ultimately what the reporting framework looks like. And lastly, we'll need to think about the methods that we use to to track and report on outcomes, as well as the timing of measurement, right? So there may be some outcomes that we could glean progress on, that are kind of really based on project metrics that are already available. But there may be some that will require additional, study or evaluation. So we'll need to keep that in mind as well. I saw a hand. Colin, is your hand up?
No, all good.
Okay. So with that, with this slide, what we're trying to illustrate here is, the various, components of the LMI EEBE performance management process as we're thinking about them, right? So not to kind of go into a deep dive into all of these, but we really wanted to kind of emphasize, how kind of multifaceted this process is going to need to be. As we think about, not only the setting of portfolio and program objectives and goals, which the commission does, the program design and implementation of those programs, how those programs are measured for progress, how progress is communicated, and then also, how that progress is discussed and how input is received. So those are all kind of important to us as we think about this developing this process moving forward. Why don't we go to the next slide, please? And I'll introduce my colleague Tanya Dougal from the department, who will provide a little bit of additional detail on our current process for performance management. Tanya, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tanya Dougal, been with the department for over a decade now, primarily reviewing all of these documents on the screen, or at least having some oversight function related to them. So what this image is trying to show is currently we have a number of interlooping processes that are ongoingly undertaken throughout the entire year. Some of you that follow the matters in DMM may see a number of filings and letters and things like that that kind of illustrate what these boxes are trying to illustrate, like the number of processes, what those individual functions are. So the charge to DPS is develop a process by which we can try to provide information in a digestible way. So our current process builds upon historical straight line reporting from years ago, and there's a number of functions that are undertaken by the utilities, a number of functions undertaken by NYSERDA, a number of functions undertaken by staff, and a number of functions undertaken by all of us at the same time. We work closely with our PAs to facilitate all of these documents and provide guidance to enforce, in a way, oversee consistency, viable data in a transparent manner that is usable for analysis and digested into allowing us to make program modifications over time ongoingly as we test, measure, adjust functions, processes, and effectiveness. So these are the functions that are specifically designed to support the LMI plan. Some of them are functions that are across portfolios. Some of them are functions that are tangent to support and coordinate with LMI plans and programs. And then some of them are the oversight functions by staff to facilitate accurate and consistent reporting and clear and concise implementation plan details and measurement and verification towards those outputs and milestones and indicators. So can you advance the slides? So right now, some of you may be familiar with these documents: SEEPS, CIP, Clean Energy Fund, Compiled Investment Plan, Strategic System Energy Efficiency Plans for the utilities, and existing guidance documents that we have through the department that we issue as staff to facilitate those filings to support what gets put forth in them, to make them iterative of the LMI implementation plan, which currently does not have a guidance document, but the reporting flows from one document to the other. And then the reporting outward on the other side also kind of interludes into the next year's reporting cycles. So that's kind of the current process right now. The components of the existing process may inadvertently silo some of these pieces. So staff does perform performance reviews to compare and analyze data across all of them to make sure there's consistency. But this is one example of the processes that we look forward to modifying in the future to make them more digestible for the stakeholders that we have. Next slide. So as you can see, there's a summary of the filings that we get to date throughout the year. The LMI order identified a number of targeted improvements to these existing processes that the Commission would like to see modifications to increase the efficiency and the efficacy of the LMI programs. And this is where today's discussion is supposed to help begin those conversations about what we could do to make that a little bit more digestible and accessible to you all. Next slide. And I'll turn it back over to Chris as he introduces what we're, those next steps of that conversation.
Great, thank you, Tanya. So yeah, as Tanya mentioned, the process that we're embarking on here is building on a lot of existing process and procedure, and so with that though, we kind of acknowledge that there are areas that need to be improved, especially as we think about trying to maximize the impact of these programs over the next 5 years. And so just to name a few, we're kind of thinking we need an enhanced feedback loop on programs from design to implementation, right? So stakeholder engagement is going to be important as programs are designed and when their progress is being reviewed. Just a side note, I know the program administrators are currently working to schedule some meetings, some in-person meetings and virtual meetings with stakeholders to inform the design of the programs for 2026 and beyond. So I expect more information on that over the next couple of weeks. We also need to make sure that we're able to document stakeholder input, right? So I know, I've worked with a number of, stakeholders over the years who, really have, challenges when it comes to, the fact that, they spend time and resources providing input on, on program issues to inform program design or, implementation details. But that input sometimes, goes into a black hole in the sense that, it's not clear what happens with that input, right? And so one of the things that the commission kind of requires, moving forward is, in the LMI implementation plan, program administrators are now going to be required to document the input received from stakeholders, right? As one way to help us ensure that, there's visibility into kind of what the priorities are, what the input is from those folks that are working, in the field, on the ground, to make these programs work. It doesn't mean that we're going to, the PAs or even the department staff will agree with all of the input that's received. But, this is really about, incorporating a level of transparency and accountability into the input that's being received, right? And then if there is an instance where, input is not incorporated, we expect to be able to kind of explain why that is, right? So stakeholders shouldn't be kind of left wondering why their input wasn't used. And then beyond that, we're really kind of focused on efficiency, right? As we talked previously, Tanya mentioned earlier, it's really important for us to kind of think about efficiency of programs and in terms of, their achievement of goals, how dollars are used, what the impact is, and how effective, these programs are. So a couple of specific requirements from the EEBE order from May is the need now for program administrators to track a new metric that is being coined, money out the door. So this is essentially a metric to look at what portion of program budgets is going towards incentives and services, really. So like how are we kind of maximizing the budgets going to administer and implement the programs to get the greatest impact, while making sure that we're maximizing the dollars going into programs and services to support those households and those buildings that we're trying to serve. The order is also requiring the need to track the geographic distribution of projects, right? So we know that based on previous engagement and conversation with stakeholders is another kind of priority, just given it isn't clear kind of where projects are happening, and as stakeholders on the ground are working to improve outreach and education and increase uptake of projects, it would be helpful to know, kind of where projects are happening, right? With greater clarity. And I'm sure there's a host of other, kind of considerations for improvement. And so what we're hoping to do with the balance of this conversation is to get input from all of you. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, we've reserved at least an hour. So in this case, we have a little bit over an hour to get some initial feedback from you all on how you're thinking about, the performance of the LMI portfolio and the programs. This is going to be just the first conversation that we're having. So I want to just emphasize, we're treating this as the first of several conversations we need to have. So we're really looking for feedback in a few key areas to start with, and we'll kind of walk through those as part of this discussion. But just to tee them up, we're going to want to get some thoughts from you all in terms of what outcomes are important to you all when it comes to these LMI EEBE programs. What are the metrics and data points that you think are important to be able to capture to understand whether those outcomes or objectives are achieved? We also want to talk about how accessible the information on program performance is. So there's a lot of different kind of reporting kind of structures and places where data is housed. And so we'd love to be able to better understand, coming from those of you who are working in the field and working with whether it's in local government or state government, or whether you're a contractor or community-based organization, how do you get information on how these programs are doing? So we want to give some time to that. And then we also want to talk through how you prefer to engage on the performance of these programs, right? So one of the things that we want to, start kind of putting some, some details around is, what the future of engagement looks like. To Kareem's question earlier in the conversation, what does it mean to enhance engagement? We want to think about that with you, and we'll kind of share kind of what we're thinking, but we obviously want to get some feedback from you all as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so for the next couple of slides, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Arturo Lua Castillo from the Office of Markets and Innovation, who is also working on the LMI EEBE portfolio. Arturo, are you there?
Here I am, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. So this slide right here is a little bit of a spoiler for the upcoming Slido questions, and I just wanted to have you guys take some time to look at them. These questions will kind of set the tone for future engagements. And basically, we want to know what the outcomes of the LMI EEBE portfolio and or programs matter most to you, just to get a sense of the priorities within all of you. And also, what metrics or data points can be used to measure progress towards the outcomes that you have identified. So this is really your chance to say, hey, we would love to know this metric, and possibly as well a little bit of why and that sort of thing. And you can always follow up with us as well at equity at dps.ny.gov. But before we get to answering these questions and running the Slido poll, we do want to contextualize these questions within two broader topics of consideration. Next slide, please. So we want to go back to the portfolio objectives, because any metric we ultimately come up with would ideally be the sort of metric where we can say, hey, if we knew this, we could look at, reducing energy consumption and costs for households, or knowing this would allow us to simplify participation and administrative burden. Those are the things we really want to strive towards, and possibly we could hit several of those bullets with a single metric if we think it out well enough, right? And also, reported metrics that already exist are another consideration to have. How are things like this being reported? Are there already ways that we're getting data and we could just adjust that, or is this completely new and we have to set new methodology? So this is going back again to what we were talking about earlier, where we have to consider the ways that we're getting and sourcing this data and the costs and benefits of that as well. Okay, so just have those two things in mind as we start thinking about what matters most to you and what it is that you need, and how we can coalesce all of our different experiences, perspectives, and insights to meet these objectives. So with that being said, let's get started with the Slido poll on the next slide. So go ahead and drop in what are the outcomes of the portfolio or the programs that matter most to you. And this could be anything from, just better performance, more weatherized homes. We'd like to hear what you have to think. Let's see. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We're always monitoring that. Arrears reduction, okay. So maybe looking at data for arrears. Energy burden, energy demand per home, that could probably fit in energy burden as well. And this is good, energy burden for vulnerable households, so getting a little more specific. Distribution of resources, utility referrals. Okay. And let's see here. Let's let a couple more answers roll in. We're getting a lot of energy burden. Clear program rules. Okay. Tracking towards still CPA goals. We do a bit of that already, but perhaps there could be some improvements. Empowerment of more LMI individuals, households, and adjacent organizations. All right. And would anybody like to expand on any of their responses here? I see a lot of energy burden. Would anybody like to probably chime in and talk about how they could leverage that to meeting those objectives, or perhaps different ways of sourcing? Do we have any hands up?
We don't see any hands yet, Arturo, but looks like Kareem just volunteered.
I wait to raise my hand, seeing if anybody else will, but if
Nope, you're okay.
jump on if others don't. So I was the one who put the empowerment of individuals and households and adjacent organizations in the energy system. And I was going to ask, or I'm thinking about the theory of change that TPS is using to think about our energy transition as we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and serve and help all households, and especially lower income households, reduce their energy burden. So if we're thinking about, right, helping one at a time with insulating their home and air sealing their home and moving off of fossil fuels one by one, then there's a certain strategy to that and certain number of metrics that we would use to gauge success. But if we're thinking about more systemic changes, then there's a relevance to having more actors in the field thinking about these issues and participating in discussions, participating in making changes on a community level and a state level. And so if we're thinking about that, then that's when like empowerment would make more sense, would be more relevant. So I'm adding that to the mix in terms of increasing energy literacy, increasing the number of people engaged in sessions and so on, because I think that makes sense in order to reach our ultimate goals, as opposed to a one-by-one approach.
Thank you. That was helpful. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Looks like we got some great responses, so I'd love to know what you guys think. You can always follow up with us as well. Let's see. Increase.
Yeah, Arturo, I don't. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I do have a question on I have a question on several of the comments. They're very interesting. But before I go with that, I see Eileen has her hand up, so I'll want to give the floor to Eileen. Eileen, are you able to unmute?
Gotcha. Thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much for
There you
that.
go.
First, I just want to say to Chris and team at DPS, thank you for involving the hubs at an early stage in this whole process. It is extremely important for us to be involved early on and make and help make contributions to the development of this process. Oftentimes, we're kind of told about things after new processes have been put in place, and we're trying to scramble to, pay attention to new changes, and it makes the work a lot harder for everybody. So thank you for that. But also, just in terms of outcomes, again, related to the hubs, as the professionals who are boots on the ground, we are intimately involved with and understand the challenges that low-income people go through daily. I mean, we are essentially, in many cases, a social worker. We hear not only about people's weatherization concerns, but about all of their issues and concerns and struggles with just daily life. And it's there's way more going on with low-income folks than than weatherization. So we just want to, in terms of outcomes, I just want to really, really stress the importance of not having customer contributions as much as possible. Obviously, with air source heat pumps and clean energy, do our absolute best to make that affordable and reasonable to attain. And please eliminate the need for weatherization in order to accommodate a no heat situation. People with no heat, I went through it for 4 hours last winter and it was horrible. I can't imagine living with that for a season or 2 seasons or 3 seasons, and utilizing space heaters routinely in order to heat my home and keep my family warm, or my oven or my stove. These are just really critical measures that I think we need to keep aware of and include in our success measuring. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Eileen. Do we have anybody else? Chris, you had some questions.
So I had one question. I don't mean to put anyone on the spot. So if you'd rather not get into it and you'd rather just drop it into a chat, the challenge with Slido as we're using it today is, it's allowing for, it's just anonymous, users. We didn't have you kind of like sign in or register for Slido, but somebody dropped in as one of the outcomes, just documentation of program changes required by DPS. And I guess I just want to be clear about that. Like, is the intent with that one that the request is that any changes identified by DPS or the commission are kind of like documented in terms of what's expected, or is the intention that program administrators are documenting how they're kind of responding to changes that have been directed by the commission or DPS? And again, I don't know who kind of put that one in, but I'd be interested just to clarify so we can, make sure that we have, we understand what you mean, and we can kind of accurately reflect that in our takeaway notes from this conversation. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands kind of related to that one. So why don't we move on? Arturo, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, sure. Let's get into the next now that we have a sense of some of the priorities. What metrics or data points can be used to measure progress towards the outcomes that you have identified? So this is now more specifically, what number of what things, or qualitatively how many houses or what kind of houses, thinking about impact and that sort of thing. So this is really a chance to really narrow down to that, if only we had that information, we could then make X assessment or that sort of thing. So go ahead and, in the last question, we got a lot of energy burden. That would also be an answer to this question, essentially. I see some people listening. Oh, here we have some of our first responses. The number of LMI households receiving retrofits in NYC increases. So maybe some more clarity on residents' utility bills, maybe like averages, means. Access to energy uses before and after the projects are completed. That's a good one. Geographic distribution, that would be nice. I'd like to talk about too, geographic distribution based on what? Project cost effectiveness, percent reduction in energy savings. That's an important one. We do a bit of work in that as well. DAC participation rate, that's a good one. That's one of those geographic impact kind of categories. Is program access growing? Okay. Number of participants, different means of outreach. Would anybody like to start expanding on any of these? It'd be great to hear what you think about perhaps sourcing some information if you know any sources, or if you think that we could possibly leverage other methods that haven't been used yet. Number of various measures by housing type, income, geography, and index. That's a really good one right there. Conversion rate, interest from interested lead to projects completed. Rated services. Do we have any hands so far? Would anybody like to speak to their contribution? As you guys can see, a lot of people have similar concerns to you as well, so it would be very helpful to share these thoughts and ideas. We're going to have a continuing discussion, so we can build on some of these concepts as well as we go on. Oh, we have a hand raised. So Rachel, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is Rachel Goodgall from Bright Power. One of the things I put in was about deferrals, tracking the number of deferrals and also deferrals rectified, which I saw a few other people put in as well. I feel like that data is very hard to get and is very important for showing that we're actually serving the households that need it most and not just deferring, out of the program households that could really benefit.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. There's also ways that overlaps, of course, with the geographic stuff that we've been looking to get into, maybe getting more descriptive on where the deferrals are happening to maybe get at why. Let's see, would anybody else like to chime in? Distribution of projects by utility territory, socio-demographic indicators, and disadvantaged community tax status. I'm loving these answers. These are great.
And Arturo, maybe just a note. I know it's hard to kind of show all of the responses on the slide while we're in present mode, but folks, if you're accessing Slido from your computer, and I think on your phone, you can scroll through the responses. So in case you see a response that might trigger a thought for yourself, make sure you do that. It looks like Jessica has her hand up. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Jessica Aguilé at Alliance for a Green Economy. I would just encourage DPS and the program administrators to think not just about measurements of outcomes, but also measurements of process. And I think, in a lot of the items listed here, I think this is harder to measure, but I think it's really important, especially in terms of trying to get the administrative burden down. I think that's often invisible when you just look at how many households are served. And I'm not exactly sure how you measure it, but I'm sure there's best practices on this in terms of measuring. I think someone called it friction in their response, or how long does it take from start to finish, or measuring the level of frustration or satisfaction with the actual process from participants and contractors and hubs, and really trying to get the amount of time down in terms of a measurement of ease of use. So I just want to encourage, some, I guess, research into best practices and creative thinking to kind of measure some of the process stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that point. That's something that we definitely want to achieve in terms of, providing the sort of reporting and data that's reliable and consistent for everyone who needs it, as opposed to having everyone, just doing different research, different reporting, and ending up coming together with different numbers. We really want to provide a sort of reliable just source of information so we can get a real picture as to how the LMI portfolio is performing. So that is something we definitely look forward to building out with feedback from you guys, of course, in the future. Let's see. Sharing of all raw data, that's a good one. I see some seconds for other ones as well. That's good. Would anybody else like to make a quick point about their contribution? All right.
And maybe this is a good point, Arturo, to just remind folks. I know we had mentioned it previously, but you know, this is not the only opportunity that you'll have to provide any any feedback on objectives or outcomes or metrics, right? You know, following the discussion today, we'll share like a a poll form that folks can use to kind of drop in additional thoughts that they have as well, so we can document those and incorporate those into the thinking. So don't feel like you have to have all of your thoughts incorporated today.
So this is Tanya from staff. I'm just going to interject slightly going through the comments and the responses in the Slido. There was a comment that specifically looked for the access to energy from before and after a project. I just wanted to clarify that project owners and implementation contractors may have that, but those are not pieces of data that will be systematically provided. However, given geolocation of project information that will be available through the disadvantaged communities reporting and also the future of the IEDR, the current UER, there are components of access to some pieces of energy use data. So I guess I want to make sure I'm clear about what the commenter was referring to in that comment.
So if someone who might have left a comment of that nature, if you wouldn't mind kind of explaining a little bit more kind of what you're thinking, I think that would be helpful, if you're able to. If not, we can seek some additional clarity on that.
Yeah, feel free to like send the emails in the email provided above as well. It's more just a matter of we want to make sure we are understanding and able to incorporate any real feedback into what we take out of this. That's all.
And it looks like we have a question on the Q&A. One of the current reported metrics is participant built savings. Is that currently reported as percentages, raw numbers, or some other way? Is it divided by type of dwelling, unit, and or geography?
So this is Tanya Dugal from staff again. So in the Clean Energy Scorecard, which goes through 18M0084 and the NYSERDA is 14M0094 and also is available on Open New York data through the Clean Energy Dashboard from NYSERDA. If you download the entire data set, the data that's underlying is a metric that uses one of our clean energy guidance documents, CE10, that is a point in time estimate of energy savings dollar values based off of the rates for the previous year, the volumetric kilowatt hour. And that is then applied to the energy savings that is either from the TRM or otherwise existing conditions or whatnot, that is then fed into the reporting on a program by program basis. So all the projects are rolled up. In the disadvantaged community reporting, we don't yet have that systematically involved because of how that will be part of the statewide broader disadvantaged communities reporting at some point in the future, or that will take that more into consideration. But as far as the savings goes, when there's a realization rate for energy savings, that then will update the participant bill savings to be reflective of whatever evaluation results may impact the volumetric energy savings applicable to that program and by census tract at some point in time. Does that help?
And maybe one of the things that Rachel's question kind of flags for us is I know, we have data dictionaries that kind of, explain kind of what, and how metrics are composed. And so maybe, one of the things in terms of process is also, making sure that people have access to, those data dictionaries and they can understand what metrics are, what the metrics are representing in terms of, you know, data.
Along those lines, I will drop in the chat a link to our clean energy guidance documents that it's available on the web. No DMM required.
Great. So, with respect to the discussion on outcomes and metrics, it looks like we don't have any additional hands raised. So maybe we'll keep the conversation going. We have a number of other topics we want to discuss. We have left time at the end of the scheduled program, so we can come back, and kind of discuss anything related to any of the topics that we've discussed today. So maybe we can put a pin in the outcomes and metrics discussion and move on to the next slide and the next topic, which is on reporting and visibility of program information.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Arturo, and I'll pass it on to Tanya.
Hello again. So if you couldn't tell, I kind of do a lot with the reporting components of our programs for the LMI program suite. So one of the questions that we will ask in the next couple rounds of Slido questions are about how, given the question that we just got, like, where is this information provided? So we kind of want to make sure we have an inventory of how you all currently are able to find, receive, email blast data from, or information from GPS and the program administrators related to the commission authorized programs, and how often you might be looking for those pieces of data, how often you actually got able to go, investigate that, spend the time to digest that and review it. And if there are more efficient ways to doing so, what those ways might be, and or different avenues that might be more accessible to provide those data. We'd like to make sure we are considering those as we investigate how to increase the effectiveness of stakeholder participation per the LMI order. So the next slide mostly, can you advance the slides? So for those who haven't seen it, this is an actual picture of cover letters of some sorts of things that we have. These are not all of them. And even just looking at those handful of things, you can go, oh, that's a lot. Well, there's a lot times at least 3. So there are a number of existing pathways right now. Hopefully you are aware of them. If not, please use that email address that we have provided already and reach out, and we will make sure that you have access or know where those things are, if you don't already know. Next slide. All right, so this will be my first slide also, we'll see how this goes. So this question, we're looking to understand, how do you typically access information, and in doing so, where are those specific measures? If you have more than one answer, please respond with each of those so that we can kind of inventory them. And I'd really like to invite everyone on this call to participate, no matter what your role is, just given that there's a number of participants that are directly engaged, which maybe we aren't aware of how you all are participating in these measures, or barriers to accessing that information as well. So we do want to hear from everybody if we can. And from the internet response, I'm curious what that means. It's just like a Google search. I'm starting to see patterns of themes of we didn't know there was a way to do so. We didn't know there was this many of them. DMM is DMM. I guess I'm curious for the person who responded DAC filings, can you clarify what that means, where you're finding those? Understandable. For the comment, one of the comments says, I've tried to use Open New York data, but it's difficult to navigate. Filings and DMM from each utility have obscure names, and there's so many that it's hard to know what you're even looking for unless you've studied all the acronyms ahead of time. For awareness, the LMI implementation plan, not that I'm saying this was going to solve all the problems, but in the LMI implementation plan, this is one of the improved process improvements that staff made a couple of years ago now, required the PAs to include a scorecard mapping so that the scorecard mapping of the program name and whatnot could be translated into the LMI program name, because there are some disconnect over time as those programs might be 1, 2, 3, 5 years old. Some of them don't continue on year to year. Some of them get changed and test measure adjusted out. Programs have shifted out of effectiveness, so sometimes we sunset them, but their data is still there, so we kind of try to maintain the availability of that data ongoingly since the beginning of the tracking period, which becomes 2016. So I understand those things, and this is all really helpful. I just want to make sure you guys understand this is really helpful for us, because that allows DPS to facilitate further engagement on how to use these tools for our stakeholders in ways that we can teach and or educate and or facilitate more readily available ways to review. I will note that NYSERDA has narrative quarterly and annual reports for their ongoing programs, and the utilities file the scorecards and see provision letters. So there's a bunch of various components that go into it. So we do understand it might be hard to keep track of all of the ways. The many more. So the many more risks mostly becomes there's the LMI implementation plan, which is mostly what we're focused on right now, but where there's SEEPs or utility rate proceedings or other programs that intersect with the LMI portfolio, like EAP, there's some programs that have other reporting requirements across DPS requirements, and there might be other reporting requirements from other funding sources that intersect with LMI programs, like RGGI has its own annual report. The legislature might have its own required reporting. So there's for the dollars that they appropriate. So there are a number of pathways to access data. I think that mostly, let me just look at, Chris, are you seeing any other categories of questions we should address?
So I don't see any hands raised, and I think we're, like you said, we're seeing a theme in you know, folks not being aware of how to find information, or it's not as easy to find, and then the need or the request that data, different types of data be made available would be good. So unless folks have anything specific that they want to call out here in discussion, I think you're good to move on, and we can always come back to this later on.
I'm just looking at the chat. I think there is
yeah, so I think on the chat, I think some folks are having a side convo, but yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Next slide. Colin, are you able to go to the next slide?
Yep, we're now on the question with how would you rate the
got you.
accessibility of portfolio or program information?
Sorry, I was expecting to pick the words to come up. So we really want to get a sense, and I can kind of estimate what the answers are going to be after the last question. How effective, again, this goes back to the comment about process improvements. This is something that DPS has continually actually worked through, and we want to make sure that we're being responsive to any accessibility, visibility, transparency concerns. And so that these questions that are on the Slido now will be really helpful for us to kind of categorize what you all are experiencing on your end. So I would really like to hear from the person who said great. I'm curious what the role is and what your involvement is that makes it more accessible to digest and utilize.
And I think that's an important, maybe question for the DPS team. Like as we're thinking about, the platforms and the reports and the mechanisms that are currently in place. What about those are conducive to making it easy to find information, or at least for those who answered great. But so if anybody's willing to share their perspective on that, that'd be great.
And I did see the comment from Martha about being able to go over reporting available. I'm happy to do so. There is a number of ways that which, as the reviewers of data, we kind of have shortcuts to monitor what comes in when. And that chart above in a few slides earlier, I think it was 15 or 16, that kind of has the list of reporting, kind of gives you a sense of when those are. But hopefully we can facilitate in an upcoming event that would be helpful for everybody. The subscribe to service is usually on each individual DMM matters page from the public side. If you have to make your own DMM account usually to subscribe, and there's different ways to subscribe. You could just subscribe to the listserv where you get everything, or subscribe to certain components of the features within DMM, which we also could walk through at some point in the future as well, if that's helpful, if there's enough people that need that. If not, we could do that on a one-on-one basis. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any more changes, but I guess noted, there's some much needed process improvement here and information improvement. One thing I'll note is when we do this, I'm happy to do this. We're happy to do this ongoingly on a regular basis, maybe annually if it helps, as we know that organizations have staff turnover and all those things. But one thing I'll advocate for is as we do this process, and we'll document it, that you guys can hopefully take back in a way that can be part of your internal processes and internal procedures for your own staff, to kind of have it on your side of the book so that it kind of stays with the organization ongoingly and gets updated with our input as needed. But this way that there is continued efficiencies in terms of train the trainers per se, or just process improvement, so that we're able to build that knowledge in real time versus just once a year. So I can definitely work with you guys to just create a process document where we can kind of give some flow of where and how that hopefully can be transferable to your own organization at some point. So the reporting data tends to be verbiage. I guess I want to make sure it's clear that there are Excel files only, and then there is PDF documents for some programs, like the LMI Portfolio suite, that correlate with the scorecard. There are additional metrics in the scorecard that are not in the LMI document itself. The primary metrics are shown in the LMI document. There's also milestones, outcomes, and outputs, and indicators that are narrative conversation. They'll show up as tables, which can kind of be extracted to be more Cliff Note version. But I guess as far as Cliff Notes, I'm not sure I'm following what types of information you'd want in the Cliff Notes. So if you could expand on that, Frank, I'd appreciate that. it could be in writing in an email or whatnot. We're just trying to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, and Tanya, so the way I took Frank's kind of input was, you know, there is just a lot of information, and you know, if we could streamline and summarize where possible, I think that could be helpful. So I think maybe that's something for us to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's
Um,
again, Eric Walker
so
has his hand
so
raised.
okay,
Hi, thank
before we go to Eric, can we just the slides kind of, we lost the slide deck.
Get that back up. I don't know what happened there.
Okay, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Chris. I just want to be sure to call out that maybe the like Cliff Notes would be useful in addition to the longer form document. I, for one, particularly find the gross anatomy of some of the reporting to be really helpful, and really useful when kind of creating through lines between what's in the LMI portfolio and other dockets per, for example. And so there's just the bigger challenge around data is like the connectivity
Right.
between and the relationship between proceedings, not just the information that is useful in like supporting clarity and visibility within a proceeding. So I just want to make sure we flag those two things as equally valuable.
Thank you. That's helpful. And again, I hope that the slide 16 that kind of shows the ebbs and flows of the proceedings and how they fit into, it kind of helps at least begin to connect some of those, but we'll definitely try to do some of that. And hopefully in the future it's easier because we'll have the LMI portfolio in a silo a little bit more than it is now to be able to follow that. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate the additional data conversation around that. So when you compare NYSERDA data to the utilities, the data fields themselves in the scorecard are the same. They follow the same scorecard. The difference being that the NYSERDA programs outside of the LMI plan have more articulation related to individual requirements from the CEF framework order back in 2016. And again, I think as time goes on, we'll see a little bit more reduced burden in reviewing those as the portfolios have been more isolated together. So I hope that that gets more digestible in the future for everybody.
Tanya, I'm gonna jump in. I think just to keep us on track, we should probably move on to the next question that we have for attendees.
Okay. And then again, though, sorry, the last question being, how would you prefer to receive this data? Email blasts, notifications somehow in other ways, direct. I'm not quite sure what the options are, but if you guys have some preferences, please let us know.
Yeah, I think this is all about like preference. You know, we want to understand, you know, what works best in your kind of, you know, day to day, and you know, if we could accommodate that, we're gonna try. So the more that we know about, you know, what you're able to access or how you want to access it, then the better.
And for these, we'll just take these back and review. I don't know that there's much conversation to be had around them, but as much detail as you can give would be helpful.
Tanya, can I ask one question of the respondents so far? I guess I'm wondering, so for those that are kind of thinking email would be the best way to access information or data on the LMI portfolio or programs, could someone speak to, is that kind of like emailing or forwarding a report that's been filed, or are you kind of thinking of additional insights that would be valuable if they were available like over email service? And you could drop a response in the Q&A or raise your hand. Eric, go for it.
Thanks again, Chris. So I'd imagine that, to the simplicity and consistency comment that was in the thread, it'd be really helpful to think of what is a customer facing version of the reporting that's in the docket. And then I hate to think of that as like a big lift, but the way that the Clean Transportation Prizes website was set up outside of the make ready order was super helpful, right? Like it was just clean and beautiful, and you could easily follow the links to it, and you knew where to get the stuff that you needed to get. And if you really wanted to go into the weeds, you go into the make ready docket and then go nerd out in the wormhole that is the docket. It would be super helpful. And then I imagine the clean energy dashboard is an attempt to simplify, aggregating data. It would just be useful to think about that kind of user experience as a way to maybe reimagine accessibility. And there's an old adage in this world is that it's all in the docket. Hell yeah, it is, but it's like, trying to find, not just a needle in the haystack, but it's like trying to find your favorite star amongst the galaxy. It's like ridiculous. And the last thing I'll say on this is that it would be really helpful if there were, there were references to the kind of, again, the relationship between varying sort of matters and other proceedings. So for example, the LMI EEBE stuff is all part of now its own separate proceeding, and the Clean Energy Fund, but the Clean Energy Fund's kind of going away or being reframed, and just like that contextual level of information is super helpful for anybody who wants to not just understand this one little like window into the world, but understand sort of the way in which that window into the world is related to other parts of the world, right? It just context matters, is all I'm saying.
Right, the microcosm of our programs. For the EV Make Ready program, do you know if that, I'm not familiar exactly because there's a few different ones. The one that's from the joint utilities, or is it a DPS-led website that you're referring to?
Yeah, the way that the order was set up, if I remember correctly, it put the utilities in charge of making those external facing websites, and then they were used to launch the prizes and stuff.
Okay. I don't see any more hands raised. There are a couple more people typing, and please take your time to respond and fill that out, and we can move on and come back if more things come up. And then we're going to move to the next topic, and I'll hand that back over to Chris.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. And so thanks everyone so far for your engagement and for sharing your thoughts and your input. As I think Tanya and Arturo had said previously, I think it's going to be really important for us to be able to document kind of what we're hearing today and be able to incorporate that into kind of our our next set of conversations, as we're expecting this to be an iterative process as we kind of build out our capabilities here in terms of being able to track and monitor what's happening with these programs. So kind of in a related note, we also want to dig into engagement with you all. I think it's no secret, like in the commission order, the commission was clear that across the board, whether that's program administrators or DPS staff, we want to see enhanced and improved engagement with stakeholders, as input on programs is going to be necessary as programs are designed, as they're implemented, and as we're talking about kind of the progress with those programs, right? Like our kind of whole objective here is to ensure that these programs, the $1.5 billion of LMI programs that will be administered over the next 5 years, will be done so in a way that kind of helps to maximize the impact of those dollars. And so it's going to be important that we kind of improve the way that we're kind of talking about these programs and eliciting feedback, that sort of thing. So as we're kind of thinking about how enhanced engagement looks like from the DPS perspective, I want to propose an initial kind of offering in terms of what we might do in terms of improving engagement. So the first thing would be to ensure that we set up a quarterly meeting, virtual meetings, with 2 of them being in person at least, right? And the whole point of these meetings will be to review program activities, will be to which include like metrics on programs, outcomes. We'll want to discuss challenges and opportunities. So both with the program administrators as well as stakeholders, right? So through kind of a community of practice and kind of in a spirit of continuous improvement, we want to make sure that we're able to identify trends and try to address any emerging issues as they pop up. And then we'd also provide open space to discuss any other emerging issues, right? So when you think about low and moderate income energy programs, I think Eileen mentioned it earlier. A few folks mentioned it in the sense that these programs don't exist in a silo, right? Changes at the federal level, changes at the state and local level, market dynamics, right, can all affect how these programs are being administered. And they could also all affect in our ability to achieve the outcomes that we're interested in. So we think it's going to be really important to make sure that we have time, multiple times a year to sit down and talk through, what's happening in this kind of, seemingly ever-changing environment. As it relates to the in-person meetings, what we're proposing is that we would have a downstate and an upstate location, and that we would kind of build in like a process improvement conversation and workshops there. DPS staff are also going to be looking to facilitate these with a third party, right? So it won't be kind of a DPS staff-led meeting. In essence, it's going to be important for us that we have a third party, that can help facilitate the conversations that'll be needed. So that'll be another part of kind of what we're thinking about. So what we'd like to do in the next, 20 minutes or so is, number one, get your input in reaction to this staff proposal that I had just mentioned, and then talk a little bit more about some additional considerations when it comes to stakeholder engagement. So let's go to the next slide if we can, and let's kick off our first Slido poll. So what are the opportunities for improving engagement on LMI programs and the overall LMI portfolio? any thoughts you have to share here would be extremely helpful. Okay, we have a number of folks typing. Okay, so in terms of improving engagement, what are the opportunities? So right off the bat, regular real-time feedback from the hubs, meetings with the PAs as they do program designs. One note I'll just mention there is, I think we spoke about it earlier today, but we know the PAs will be scheduling meetings to kind of talk through program design from their perspective. So that is something that the program administrators are going to need to do, and we want to give them the space to do that. There's a comment about wider eligibility. If you wouldn't mind, whoever suggested wider eligibility, could you kind of expand on that a little bit, either in the Q&A or chat, or even raise your hand if you want to maybe speak to what you're thinking there? So we've got some comments about the design of the scorecard, more interactive notice boards, digital space for stakeholders and the public, encouraging statewide contractor licensing. So when we're talking about engagement, we're really talking about discussing and engaging on the actual programs and performance. But we'll take other suggestions for the LMI programs as well, if you have them. Okay, great. So it looks like we have a few more participants still typing. I'm gonna open it up. Do we have one or two folks that want to speak a little bit more about what they're recommending here? Okay. Well, we have a couple of additional questions for you on engagement. So why don't the folks that are typing finish that up? Thank you for providing your thoughts here on opportunities for how we can improve engagement on these programs and the portfolio overall. If there are specifics that you want to talk about, we can come back to them, but let's move on to the next slide, if you don't mind, Colin. Okay, so here we'd like to get a sense from you all about whether, from your perspective, there are modes of engagement that we could be considering beyond virtual and in-person meetings or forums, right? So are there kind of approaches that we could take that would improve visibility into programs or portfolio performance beyond kind of the in-person or virtual meetings? Okay, so we have some folks typing. We have a question in the Q&A box, so why don't we go to that? How can DPS avoid the temptation to invest lots of time and resources into another web resource that looks fancy but gets little use, rather than producing simple, straightforward reports that get shared via existing channels? So Kareem, thanks for offering that up. I think you're referring to, like, our clean energy dashboard and that sort of thing. Is that correct? I don't want to.
I'm not referring to anything in particular. I just know over the
Okay.
years that often there are,
Okay.
with many programs, they invest millions of dollars in a new site or hoping that that will finally solve the question of engagement, and it rarely does.
Point taken. Thanks, Kareem. And no slight intended on the clean energy dashboard. So apologies for jumping to the clean energy dashboard when I was thinking of a fancy web resource. Okay, so in terms of our other potential approaches for engagement, a central website with an option to post questions that can be answered in a monthly email, newsletter, email blasts. Good point here. It's less about the venue and more about the quality of the conversation. Focus groups. Does anyone who offered up a response want to provide a little more context or explain what you're thinking? Or if anyone hasn't responded and you'd prefer just to provide an overview on your thinking? Okay, KPI dashboards, different in-person quarterly meeting formats, roundtable versus classroom. Okay, so this is all really helpful, everyone. Gives us a chance to really kind of map out what the potential options are here. Great. So I know there's a few folks still typing. Why don't you finish up entering in your thoughts, and then we're going to move on to the next question that we have for you. So something like the NYSERDA Energy Equity Collaborative with stakeholders from across the state who get paid to think about and reflect on the indicators and progress. Okay. I will mention, as we're kind of waiting for folks to wrap up their points, in the EEBE order, the commission approved additional funding for engagement activities through NYSERDA, which include the Energy Equity Collaborative, and did make a point for DPS and the utilities to think of ways to leverage the existing venues that NYSERDA has. So both the collaborative, the regional clean energy hubs, right? So many folks from the hubs on this meeting. So that's also something that's on our mind in terms of how to make the greatest use out of the existing engagement venues that are in place at the moment. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your input there. Let's move on to the next question that we have for you all. Speaking of the clean energy hubs, so we'd like to get your take on how existing stakeholder engagement opportunities that exist, whether it's the regional clean energy hubs or kind of the program administrator. So whether that's NYSERDA, through the Equity Collaborative, which we mentioned, through utilities, right? Many utilities do stakeholder engagements. So how can we think about ways to better align kind of what we're contemplating here with those existing channels of engagement? And we're really kind of interested in this in the spirit of reducing confusion and administrative burden for those of you who will be having to engage. So if you wouldn't mind just entering in your thoughts that you have now. Okay, so we've got a lot of thoughts related to making it easier to just link and streamline information. DPS taking over all engagement activities to ensure PAs actually listen and utilize recommendations. I don't think we could take over everything, but we want to maximize our ability to leverage all of the engagements, though. Better outreach to contractors from hubs. Collaboration, across the board. Does anyone who submitted a response want to provide any kind of additional context or explain it any further? There's a point you want to make, then it's a good time to do that. Okay. This is really helpful, so thank you all for taking the time to be creative with these responses. Okay, so we've got a point. NYSERDA meets with hubs and BPCA on alternate weeks. What would more collaboration look like? Okay, so this is maybe a NYSERDA oriented collaboration as opposed to a linkage of what DPS is needing to do with what NYSERDA and the utilities do. Engagement with contractor groups, so installers, contractors, or other service providers. It seems like is an important constituency that we need to make sure is engaged. Okay. All right. So thank you all for that. Finish in putting in your comments, and let's move on to the next question, please. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. I want to make sure we get to the next couple of discussion points that we have for you all. So we'd like to get a better sense from everybody, what the preferred format for DPS staff-led engagement sessions should look like, right? So we've got in-person meetings, we've got virtual meetings, hybrid, or if there's another, option that you have. So obviously, as we've discussed already, we're going to take all the feedback that you've provided and use that to help inform kind of ultimately what our proposed approach would look like. I mentioned earlier that our initial proposal is, let's do quarterly meetings, and we'll make sure 2 of those are in person, and 2 of them remote. We want to balance like the time and effort it would take for, I mean, look at this meeting. We have, we had as many as 90 something folks on the meeting. That's a lot of people to have to take time away from their day for these meetings. So we want to make sure that we're judicious in terms of how we're structuring these engagements. Okay, so it looks like the majority of the group is preferring an in-person meeting, either in Albany or New York City. And I know that this poll isn't giving you probably the ability for you to add some nuance here in terms of, do you prefer other locations for in-person, right? But if you do have additional thoughts on this preferred format, that are beyond kind of the options that you have to respond to right now, please drop it in the chat, or the QA, I should say. Frank, we hear you. So in-person meetings by location exclude most of the state. So Western New York, North Country, Central New York. So those are all important. That's an important consideration. So we'll need to think about how we could address that. And hybrid consisting of online combined with in-person. Yep. Thank you. Okay. All right. So if we don't have any other comments in the chat, or if no one else wants to explain your thoughts. Oh, sorry, Martha, I missed yours. Would be interested in joint presentation from BPCA and hub meetings with NYSERDA on many of the topics discussed today. Okay. Okay. Thank you all for actively participating over these last few slides. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So we've really framed the conversation today around three considerations. Metrics, outcomes, how you might typically access information and what your preference would be to access that information on programs, and then engagement. We know that there are other considerations that matter when it comes to a performance management process. So maybe what we could do with 5 minutes remaining on today is to open it up. If there are additional considerations that you want to put on the table now, it would be a good time to do so. Colin, would you mind advancing the slide deck? So we have one final Slido poll, or I guess it's just an open question. What additional considerations should DPS staff have in developing the performance management process for the LMI EEBE portfolio? So as mentioned a few times today, this isn't the only conversation we're going to have on this topic. So if you're not able to get in kind of all of your thoughts, or if you want a little more time to think about it, that's going to be okay. We are going to follow up the meeting with an email that has a form for you to kind of drop more information into if you'd like. And then we'll be setting up some subsequent meetings to talk through kind of these in a more topical kind of fashion. So we'll dedicate a meeting to outcomes and metrics. We'll dedicate a meeting to reporting and accessing information, and then we'll dedicate a meeting to engagement, and then obviously anything else that kind of rises to kind of to the forefront when it comes to other priorities or considerations. Health and safety measures, overview of the other frameworks. Hearing from those served by programs, questionnaires, public meetings, surveys. Yep, excellent point. Qualitative issues, how do LMI and DAC disadvantaged communities reporting requirements fit together, customer journey mapping. There's some comments about potential distrust amongst some PAs and utilities. Making reports more customer friendly. And I think that's a good kind of consideration here is we certainly have regulatory requirements, right? The commission issues an order, authorizes funding, authorizes kind of some program activities. And it's really important for the utility or NYSERDA, whoever is, responsible for administering the funds, to, to report and kind of do that in a way that meets kind of, commission and department regulatory requirements. But that doesn't mean that, that information can't be, kind of distilled or, kind of also framed in a way for customers and, those that aren't, in the regulatory kind of space to access. And so that's a really important kind of reminder for all of us here. Great. Okay, so I want to thank you all for providing feedback here. I don't see any hands. Does anybody want to kind of provide any additional perspective on this question? If not, I want to talk a little bit about next steps before we wrap up. Oh, Frank, go ahead.
It figures easier to raise my hand at this point. One of the things that we're
Go for
seeing is that we have all these funding pools, and what we're finding is that not all of them are working together. So, okay, we have the weatherization mandate for utilities, but we still have the Clean Heat New York. And the problem gets into is that Clean Heat New York incentivizes heat pumps if you put a bigger one in. Well, if they go through the weatherization program, it's counterintuitive. We'd like to actually see something where these programs all kind of drive together. If they get the weatherization work done, can they get a certificate from NYSEG saying it's been done, and they get an extra kicker from the utility then for heat pump because they did make the reduction instead of taking the penalty? If NYSERDA is doing work there and they happen to do the low income attic and rim joists, and that's all they can get done for the program because of funding limits, when they go back to the utility, can they get the wall money, even though the attic and rim's already been done, because that's also have to do. Right now, everything being in silos makes it really hard to get anything done because there's only so much money the homeowners have, and for low to moderate income, they can't afford to pay attention to start with. They're not going to come up with more money just because. So having all these things kind of channel be able to work together a little bit more consistently would help a lot, especially with the transition coming up.
Yeah, Frank, thanks for raising that. And that is something I know we have colleagues from other kind of, from non-LMI programs also kind of on the line here today. So that's something that we'll make sure we take back and have a discussion on. And obviously it's something we could follow up on as we regroup here as well. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I want to just kind of tee up some next steps before everyone has to leave. So the commission order from May requires DPS staff to file an initial performance management framework, essentially a blueprint for kind of how we're proposing to approach this work, due in a week. So DPS staff will be working to kind of pull that together. We want to kind of remind everyone that webinar participants are able to follow up with additional thoughts beyond today. So we have equity@dps.ny.gov email address. So this is, an email box that's monitored by all the DPS folks that you heard from today, in addition to a couple of others. So there's a lot of eyes on that. So any additional thoughts you want to have there would be great. We'll also be sending out an email, like I said, that'll have a form so you could add some additional information. DPS will be having meetings with the utilities and NYSERDA to do a deeper dive into program data and systems considerations. So remember, we do want to balance the cost and burden of reporting and providing information where we can. And then importantly here, I know many of you have to leave, but we are going to be following up separately to schedule some additional meetings to talk about specific topics here. So through, from August through October, we're going to want to schedule at least, 3 or 4 meetings to kind of dig in a little bit more on the performance management work, as ultimately this performance management process will live in staff guidance documents. So Tanya earlier kind of flagged clean energy guidance documents that are kind of laying out the groundwork or the plans for how utilities and NYSERDA should report, for instance. We envision staff guidance documents as also to be, the mechanism for us to kind of promulgate the approach that we'll be taking with performance management. So we'll talk through the approach that we'll take, the next time we meet. But with that, I just want to take a chance to say thank you again to everyone for making time for this conversation. You've provided us with a lot to think about, and obviously there's a lot more to think about as well. But I think this has been a really useful kind of first conversation on the topic, and we're looking forward to additional dialogue with everyone. So thanks again for the time, and look out for an email from us in the next couple days, just with a recap on today and next steps. So thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.